Greetings, noble traveler. I am Lady Miriel Rivermyst of the Rivermyst Arcana, a veritable repository of knowledge concerning all things magical. I welcome you to the enchanting realm of Magic: The Gathering, a strategic card game where you assume the mantle of a powerful mage, known as a planeswalker, casting formidable spells to vanquish your foe in a contest known as a duel. While typically, you shall face a single opponent, there exists the possibility of engaging in a game with 3 or more players. To partake in Magic: The Gathering, you shall craft a deck of cards based upon a blend of the 5 colors of magic: green, white, blue, red, and black. Each color of magic represents a set of concepts and philosophies which influence not only the types of cards present in that color, but also the playstyle dictated by inclusion of that color in your deck. Green represents nature, spirituality, and speed. White represents peace, order, and equality. Blue represents knowledge, subterfuge, and control. Red represents destruction, impulse, and chaos. And black represents death, sacrifice, and power. There exist 7 types of cards with which you may construct your deck: lands, creatures, artifacts, enchantments, sorceries, instants, and planeswalkers. In most formats, you may possess as many basic lands as you like, but all other types of cards are restricted to a maximum of 4 of any card with a particular name. So, for example, you could build a deck with a cat creature theme, and possess as many different types of cats as you wish, but your deck may still contain a maximum of only 4 Savannah lions. Forging a potent deck of cards is one of the quintessential strategies of the game. In future gatherings, we shall delve into the boundless options and strategies for deck building. For today, however, we shall focus on the fundamental rules and mechanics you must know to commence your journey. Let us begin. To begin, each player requires a deck, typically containing a minimum of 60 cards. Each player starts with 20 life points. You may keep track of each player's life points in whatever manner suits you best. The objective of the game is to reduce your opponent's life points to 0. To determine who shall play first, roll a die or flip a coin to decide the play order. Each game of Magic unfolds with each player taking turns that follow 5 phases. The beginning phase, the pre-combat main phase, the combat phase, the post-combat main phase, and the ending phase. Now, let us explore each of these 5 phases in detail. The beginning phase consists of 3 steps: the untap step, the upkeep step, and the draw step. In the untap step, you shall untap all your tapped cards, making them ready for use during your turn. In a moment, we shall examine how cards become tapped during play. In the upkeep step, you shall resolve any effects that trigger at the commencement of your turn. These effects shall be explicitly stated on a card in play. In the draw step, you shall draw 1 card from your deck. Note that you will draw only 1 card unless specifically instructed or allowed to draw more cards based on the effects of a card in play. After the draw step, the beginning phase is complete. The pre-combat main phase consists of a single step, but this is where most of your card plays shall transpire. During this phase, you may play a single land, plus as many creatures, enchantments, sorceries, and artifacts as your pool of available mana allows. Mana is magical energy provided primarily by lands, but also by some other types of cards that possess a special ability to provide mana. Each source of mana shall provide a specific color of mana, except for cards that provide colorless mana, which cannot be used as a specific color but can fulfill any colorless mana requirements. To determine the color provided by a mana source, look for a symbol, a number, or a combination of both within the body text of the card. A tree symbol equals green mana, a fireball symbol represents red mana, a sun symbol represents white mana, a water drop represents blue mana, and a skull represents black mana. A diamond symbol or a number with no symbol represents colorless mana. To utilize the mana from a mana source, whether from a land or another card, you tap that card. While there are various ways to indicate that a card is tapped, rotating the card by 90 degrees is a typical method. Note that while you may play only 1 land from your hand per turn, you may tap as many lands, and other mana sources, as you desire to add mana to your available mana pool. Your mana pool represents the colors and counts of mana you have available to cast spells. Note also that you may tap to add mana to your mana pool at any point during this phase. Thus, you may tap one or more cards for mana, play a card with that mana, tap one or more additional cards for mana, play another card with that additional mana, and so forth until you either exhaust your mana or play all the cards you wish to play. To determine the mana cost of a card you'd like to play, look at the upper right corner of the card, where you shall see a combination of color symbols and numbers. To play that card, you must have available mana in your mana pool to provide the count of colored mana, as represented by color symbols, plus the count of any color of mana, as represented by a number. The mana count represented by the number can be fulfilled by any combination of colored or colorless mana available in your mana pool. Note that a diamond symbol represents colorless mana, and that part of the casting cost may be fulfilled only by available colorless mana. After you play your first card, you may continue playing as many other cards as you wish until you deplete your mana pool. Note that any excess mana in your mana pool is lost at the end of this phase, so you must be prudent about how many cards you tap to add mana to the mana pool. Any creature cards you play during this phase, including artifact creatures, suffer from summoning sickness, meaning that they cannot be used to attack this turn. They can, however, be used in defense during your opponent's turn. Any cards you utilized to generate mana during this phase are now tapped, and remain tapped until the start of your next turn during the untap step of the beginning phase. This means that they cannot be used for any other action until they are untapped. One of the more confusing and important details to understand about Magic the Gathering is that it is possible for the opposing player to play cards or take actions during your turn. If the opponent has cards that say instant in the card's descriptive text, or abilities possessed by cards already in play, they may play those cards or actions during your turn, provided they have available untapped mana to pay the cost of the card or the action. Since your opponent can take actions during your turn, often to block or counter an action you are attempting to take, each player's actions occur in an order referred to as the stack. Note that the stack is an imaginary space and not a physical stacking of cards in the game. When you, as the active player, cast a spell, that is, play a card that isn't a land, or activate an ability on one of your cards, you create a new stack. Your opponent may then play an instant card or use an instant ability to respond to your play. Your opponent's action then goes on top of the stack. After your opponent's response, you then have the opportunity to play another card or take another action to respond to your opponent's action. Your action then becomes the new action at the top of the stack. Your opponent may then once again respond. This passing of the opportunity to play a new card or action passes back and forth until neither player has added anything new to the stack. In other words, once both players are out of actions to play, the stack is complete and must be resolved. Resolving the stack starts with the last card or action played and proceeds in reverse order. So, if you take action A, your opponent counters with action B. You then counter with action C. And then both you and your opponent declare that you are out of actions for this stack. The stack is then resolved starting with action C, moving on to action B, and finishing with action A. In a future gathering, we shall explore the concept of the stack in greater detail. For now, it is most crucial to understand that each player can take actions during the other's turn, and that exchange of actions must happen in a specific order. Now that you have played all the cards you wish to play in the pre-combat main phase, you may choose to attack your opponent. While there are many cards that can directly reduce the opponent's life points, like the lightning bolt spell for example, the most common way to reduce the opponent's life points is through combat. With that in mind, let us delve into the combat phase in detail. Combat unfolds in a series of 5 steps. The beginning combat step. The declare attacker's step. The declare blocker's step. The combat damage step. And the end of combat step. Now, let us explore each step in detail. In the beginning combat step, you shall choose which opponent to attack. While Magic the Gathering is usually played by 2 people, it is possible to play games consisting of 3 or more players. In that case, you must choose which of your multiple opponents to attack. In the declare attacker's step, you shall choose which of your creatures will attack the selected opponent. Remember that creatures you summoned in the pre-combat main phase this turn have summoning sickness and may not attack this turn. Also, any attacking creatures must have been under your control since the start of this step, unless they possess the haste special ability. In the declare blocker's step, your opponent declares which of their creatures shall block. All untapped creatures are available to block, and the defending player can block with as many as they choose. Typically, 1 blocker is assigned to 1 attacker, although multiple blockers may be assigned to 1 attacker. Also, while blocking does not tap the defending creature, creatures that are already tapped cannot block. This means that players must often be cautious about choosing creatures for an attack, knowing that they will then not be available to defend on the opponent's turn. Note that the defender is not required to assign any creatures to block. The defender may, instead, choose to simply allow the attacking creatures through and lose life points as a result of the attack. Next, we have the combat damage step. Once blockers are assigned, the players calculate combat damage, which is simultaneous, except when one or more creatures possess first strike or double strike. If a blocking creature dies from combat damage or is removed before damage is resolved, the attacking creature is still blocked. Only when an attacking creature possesses the trample special ability can its damage get through to the attacking player after being blocked. If the defender blocks a single attacking creature with multiple defending creatures, the attacker chooses how to assign damage among the multiple defending creatures. This means that, as with many aspects of Magic the Gathering, the defender must be cautious about how they choose to block an attacker. There is no singular correct answer. Note that any creatures eliminated in combat go into your discard pile, also referred to as the graveyard. Likewise, any card eliminated for any other reason besides exile will also go into your discard graveyard. Finally, in the end of combat step, after all damage is resolved and dead creatures are removed, any stated end of combat actions take place. Let us examine a specific example of how combat works. Suppose your opponent attacks you with a hill giant, a creature with no special abilities. Looking at the two numbers in the lower right corner of the card, the first digit is the creature's power. This is the amount of damage dealt by the creature when it attacks. In this example, the hill giant will deal 3 damage. The second digit is the creature's toughness. This is the amount of life the creature possesses. If it receives damage equal to or greater than this number, it shall perish and be removed from play. So, in this example, if the hill giant receives 3 or more damage in combat, it shall perish. Typically, we state both numbers in sequence to describe a creature's power and toughness. Thus, we would call the hill giant a 3/3 creature. Please note that there are numerous ways for either or both of these factors to be increased or reduced by additional spells. For this combat example, we shall assume no change to the factors as shown on the card. After your opponent declares their attack, you, as the defender, have the opportunity to declare your blockers, if any. Note that you could simply choose not to block, and, instead, lose 3 life points, which is the amount of damage that the hill giant inflicts. In this example, you have at your disposal a grizzly bears, which is a 2/2 creature, meaning that it has a power of 2 and a toughness of 2. You also have available a savanna lions, which is a 2/1 creature. Neither of your potential defenders is tapped, so each is available to block the hill giant. Assuming you decide to block, you have 3 possible options. You may block with the grizzly bears, block with the savanna lions, or block with both together. Suppose you decide to block with only the grizzly bears. Your blocking creature has a power of 2, so it would inflict 2 damage on the hill giant. Since the hill giant possesses a toughness of 3, it would survive the damage inflicted by the grizzly bears. On the other hand, the hill giant would inflict 3 damage on the grizzly bears due to its power of 3. The grizzly bears card has a toughness of 2, so the grizzly bears would perish and be removed from play at the end of combat. Note that the hill giant still has 1 point of power left over after inflicting 2 damage on the grizzly bears. This extra power is simply lost and does not carry over to your life points or to any of your other creatures. In a future gathering, we shall cover the trample special ability, which does allow a creature's unassigned damage to carry over. So, in this example, the final result is that the hill giant survives, the grizzly bears perish, and you do not lose any life points. The opponent's hill giant is now tapped, and is, therefore, unavailable to use for defense on your turn. In another possible scenario, suppose you decide to block the hill giant with both the grizzly bears and the savanna lions. In that case, your grizzly bears inflict 2 damage on the hill giant. The savanna lions inflict an additional 2 damage on the hill giant. Since the giant possesses a toughness of 3, the 4 total damage inflicted by your defenders would suffice to eliminate the giant. The attacker then chooses how to allocate damage among your 2 defenders. The most typical choice would be to assign 2 of the giant's 3 power points to the grizzly bears and then the remaining 1 damage to the savanna lions, eliminating both defenders. Thus, in this example, the final result is that all 3 creatures perish and are removed to their owner's discard graveyards. And you, as the defender, do not lose any life points. Now, let us turn the tables and make you the attacker. You had played both the bears and the lions in a previous turn, so they are both over their summoning sickness and may now be used for attack. You may choose to attack with one, both, or neither. In this example, your opponent still possesses the hill giant, untapped, and has the option of using the giant for defense. Suppose you choose to attack with only the grizzly bears, leaving the lions as a potential defender for your opponent's next turn. Your opponent may choose to either simply allow the attack through without blocking, costing them 2 life points, or choose to block with the hill giant. If your opponent blocks the grizzly bears with the hill giant, as in the earlier scenario, the hill giant would survive the 2 damage from the grizzly bears, but the bears would perish as a result of the giant's 3 damage. While this attack may seem ill-advised at first glance, there are specific strategic situations in which this might be a wise choice. We shall cover those situations in a future gathering. Now let us suppose you attack with both your grizzly bears and your savanna lions. Again, your opponent may choose to simply allow both attacks through and lose 4 life points. Or they may choose to block with the hill giant. But the giant can block only one of your 2 attackers. Comparing the giant's factors to those of both the bears and the lions, either attacking creature that the defender chooses to block will be slain, while the giant shall survive. However, the unblocked attacking creature would inflict its damage on the opponent, reducing their life points. That surviving attacking creature would then be tapped, making it unavailable for defense on your opponent's next turn. As you can see, even in this simple scenario, attacking and defending decisions offer fascinating strategic complexity. Sometimes called the second main phase, the post-combat main phase provides an additional opportunity to play more cards. Any play that would be legal in the pre-combat main phase is also legal here. Generally, it is best to play any cards you can in the pre-combat main phase. However, there can be specific strategic reasons to wait and play additional cards in this phase. The ending phase consists of 2 steps: the end step and the cleanup step. In the end step, any effects that last until end of turn conclude here. Effects that occur at the beginning of the end step happen here. In the cleanup step, the active player is required to reduce their hand to maximum size, typically 7 cards, although some special abilities allow the player to hold more cards. Note that any forced drawing of cards required by a special ability occurs before the cleanup step, which then may result in discarding 1 or more cards during the cleanup step. After completion of the ending phase, the turn passes to the next player, who then repeats all 5 phases. Play continues in this manner until either you or your opponent has lost all 20 life points, leaving the survivor as the victor. Here are a few key terms for you to be aware of as you commence playing Magic: The Gathering. Certain cards contain text that refers to the target permanent. A permanent is any card that remains on the board after being played, such as a land, creature, artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker. By contrast, instant cards and sorcery cards are not considered permanents, as they do not remain on the board after being played. Of course, in many cases, the effects of an instant or sorcery do remain on the board after the card itself is played and removed. An example of this kind of permanent effect would be adding to the board a token representing an additional creature. Another concept of which you should be aware is the ability to exile a card. As we discussed in the combat example, creatures and other cards that are destroyed or consumed during play are placed in your discard pile, also known as the graveyard. In some situations, you can retrieve cards from this discard graveyard. But there are certain cards with the capability to exile other cards. When a card is exiled, it is removed from play altogether and not placed in your discard graveyard. It is best to create a separate discard pile that represents your exiled cards. Cards that allow you to retrieve other cards from the graveyard do not allow you to retrieve cards from exile, as exile is a permanent removal from play. Thus concludes our introduction to how to play Magic: The Gathering. However, our journey through this grand game has only just begun. Magic is a marvelous game full of almost infinite strategic possibilities, both in deck building and in play. Each week, Rivermyst Arcana shall produce additional videos to help you understand the rules, mechanics, and strategy of Magic: The Gathering. Please subscribe to our channel to receive each week's new instruction. Meanwhile, thank you for watching this tutorial. May your mana be plentiful, and your spells be powerful. Until next time, happy gaming!